I am here with Ajax Pickering MP, Mr. Chris Alexander, and I'll start off with a small background on him, which you can find on his website if you put his name into a search engine. He has worked for 18 years as a member of the Canadian Foreign Services. His first posting was at the Canadian Embassy in Russia, and by 2003 he became Canada's first resident ambassador in Kabul, Afghanistan. Between 2005 and 2009, he served as a Deputy Special Representative of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan. In May 2011, he was appointed as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Defense, and recently he published a book titled A Long Way Back, Afghanistan's Quest for Peace. So we'll start off with the most important question. How are you today?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me on your show.
Given you have been stationed far away for most of your career up till now, how does it feel to be back on Canadian soil on a relatively more permanent basis? I also understand that you're a father of 2 young daughters.
Well, it's fabulous to be a parent. I had no idea how rewarding that experience would be until it actually started for me 3 years ago. And it's great to be able to share your home country with a new generation, and to allow the advantages that we have here: peaceful country, low crime rate, relatively prosperous economy, to expose your children to that, and to let them grow up with that around them. I'm sad to think of people in Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, even Russia, places where I've lived or been recently, that just don't have the same opportunities.
Despite a more permanent stay in Canada now, it's true that you went to Sri Lanka recently on a fact-finding mission. So when one thinks of Sri Lanka, recent news comes to mind. Recent news where we heard of credible allegations of war crimes, human rights abuses, and systematic killings of Tamils at the hands of the Sinhalese military. Today we hear of ongoing sexual abuse on Tamil widows, violence against the media, and anyone who stands up for human rights, whether it be Tamil or Sinhalese. So the first question is, what are some of your major concerns from your time there with respect to the fact-finding mission, your top 3 or 4 concerns that you'd like to briefly discuss?
Well, we absolutely do have very serious concerns. And you've heard from Prime Minister Harper, from Foreign Minister Baird, from other members of this government, how seriously they are taking their policy towards Sri Lanka, because human rights are not being respected, by and large. And I mean, we have to keep our perspective here. It is, on the whole, better for the country not to be at war. You know, the period 2009 has brought a relative peace, and the number of people being killed overall in the country has gone down since 2009. But the peace is not a durable one, and the situation will not be satisfactory from our perspective until certain major concerns are addressed. And what we saw in the north of the country, and I think the same is true in many parts of the east, was a military presence that is far greater than what would ever be justifiable in peacetime in our country or other countries that claim to have ended the conflict. Civil and police institutions, local civil and police institutions that are far too weak. Local elections that have not yet been held. And as you say, far too many credible reports of continuing human rights abuses. People disappearing, people facing arbitrary detention in one way or another, or arbitrary abuses from those in authority. So those are all major concerns. We've raised them. We expect action. Action has been promised for a long time, and there was a new plan of action put forward, I think, by the government this summer, but it hasn't actually translated into change on the ground, and that is of deep concern to us. As Prime Minister Harper said, he is not prepared to attend a Commonwealth summit in Colombo unless there is significant progress on these fronts. And we have yet to see that. Moreover, before 2009, there was a very serious, protracted conflict. And many people died on all sides, but above all in the final stages in the north, in Mutalivu, in Kilinuchi, in the places where the last stand, if you will,
the Muliavaikal area
of resistance took place. Families, those affected, victims, those injured, the relatives of those who are missing, they deserve to know what happened. And there hasn't been a serious, concerted attempt to establish who died, where their remains are, what happened. And that makes it very hard for Tamils in Sri Lanka and for the whole society of Sri Lanka, as well as international partners, to obtain closure for what was a very dark chapter in the country's history.
All right, thank you. And you mentioned a few concerns. Are there any plans or ideas on how to address those concerns from what Canada can do, from looking at it from the Canadian perspective?
Well, Canada can and is doing quite a lot. The first thing, and probably the most important thing we can do, is to talk about these issues.
Definitely.
To speak the truth about what is happening, and that's just not just a job for governments, it's a job for media, it's a job for people who are traveling to Sri Lanka. But we can also help in small ways and large. I was impressed in Jaffna, in Kilinuchi and elsewhere, by how many Canadians are on the ground, visiting their relatives, visiting their communities, sometimes at risk to themselves, sending resources back, planning to build houses, to build schools. That's very useful. That helps to bring life back to normal, even though we know it's very far from being normal. But then there are government programs, official programs, that deserve support. Canada's been a very generous supporter of various UN agencies, as they have helped with the return of internally displaced people to their homes. And a lot of people have gone back, only to find that their house is gone or burned, that their land needs a lot of work. Some of their land or property may have been confiscated. So it's a painful return. But the people who are returning need support from the UN, from us as a bilateral donor, and from individual Canadians who take an interest in Sri Lanka.
Right. Canadians, the Tamil Canadians, some of whom are in your writing, have been deeply and psychologically affected by the horrific and dire fate of their relatives during the closing days of the war. It has been 3 years, and the prevailing feeling amongst humanitarians in Canada, amongst rights groups such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, is that there is still no justice. So the question is, if Sri Lanka fails to take credible steps in stopping humanitarian abuses, investigate war crimes, provide answers for the tens of thousands of missing Tamils, what do you think should be the next steps taken by Canada and the international community?
Well, we have taken some steps on our own that I think are quite courageous with regard to the future Commonwealth Summit. But we also want to act in concert with our partners.
That's true.
And given the lack of action on the fronts, on all of these fronts that you mentioned, last spring there was a very strong signal sent by the international community through a resolution of the Human Rights Council in Geneva saying, listen, you're the government of Sri Lanka. You have the power to do these things, to help return civil life to normal in the north and east of the country. You have the power to bring about reconciliation, to allow victims to tell their stories, to allow the truth to come out. It hasn't happened. If it doesn't happen, there will be continuing work at Geneva, continuing consultation, and probably even tougher consequences for Sri Lanka and in that forum and perhaps elsewhere. The issue you raise, the trauma that not just individuals have been through, entire communities, the whole country has been through, is a very serious one. I've seen it in Afghanistan, which suffered from decades of war. I've seen it in parts of Russia, like Chechnya, which experienced very intense forms of conflict, it has to be taken seriously. And you're right, people are traumatized. They carry that pain within them. They've lost relatives. They don't know what happened to their relatives. And we all have a duty to help them get through that. The main principle we have to obey in anything we do is that victims are at the center of this. They have the right to tell their story, to speak, to express their pain, to point the finger if they think someone is guilty, and to talk about what they expect in terms of justice and accountability. And that justice doesn't have to take the form of a law court proceeding. It can take many different forms. There can be, transitional justice has a wide range of options open to it. But it's very important, I think, in a case like Sri Lanka's, a country that had a strong justice system, independent courts, independent prosecutors, that had the rule of law for a long time before this conflict, that these issues be taken seriously, because the rule of law and justice will not be served unless these terrible crimes that took place in the past are better understood, and some of those who were responsible are brought to justice. And we have to understand, conflict has two sides. There were not crimes just on one side or just on the other. And so there's going to be finger pointing and potential for accountability on all sides. But it's very important not to just ignore these issues, because peace without justice tends not to be a very enduring peace. That's a lesson from many parts of the world.
Yep. Thank you. Looking at recent news, do you think that the recent actions taken against Iran can also be taken against Sri Lanka potentially into the future?
Well, the situations are different. Iran had its revolution in 1979. There's been a regime there that was difficult for Canada and other law-abiding countries to deal with ever since. There was war with Iraq. There was a series of wars in and around Lebanon that involved Iran in significant ways. Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism, which Canada has acknowledged openly through its support of Hezbollah and Hamas. And now, today, Iran has two policies that are a direct threat to regional, global peace and security, and potentially to the whole world. First, they are supporting the Assad regime in Syria, which is engaged in a very live conflict that has cost 25,000 people their lives so far. And secondly, they're driving to have nuclear weapons. And we are not, this is not a debatable fact. It's something that the United Nations agencies, which share, where information is shared among many different players, have confirmed. And if a country whose president says Israel should be wiped off the face of the earth acquires nuclear weapons, obviously there are very serious consequences, not just for Israel, but for the whole region. So all of those factors have meant that diplomats like Canada's in Tehran are vulnerable. We saw the British embassy there invaded late last year. We decided it was prudent to take our diplomats out, and in fact we closed our visa office back in May. So those measures are very specific to Iran. With Sri Lanka, we have a different relationship. In fact, we have still quite a rich, wide-ranging bilateral relationship. We don't see Sri Lanka as a threat to regional peace and security. We're worried about Sri Lanka's treatment of its own people and a very sizable segment of the population in the north and east who are affected by the conflict and who don't feel that for them the militarization that came with the conflict is over. And as a result, they don't feel that they are able to participate in Sri Lankan life, national life, fully, meaningfully, to pursue careers, to pursue their professions, to develop their farms freely. And so that's an issue internal to Sri Lanka, but it matters to the whole world because Sri Lanka is part of the Commonwealth. And we expect a high standard of governance from fellow members of the Commonwealth. And we've seen in the past Sri Lanka is very capable of having independent institutions of justice, having the rule of law, having a flourishing economy, respecting human rights. The successive governments managed to be certainly one of the leading countries in South Asia on all of those fronts for decades. Why can't they do it now? That's the question we're asking.
Okay, and now speaking of making decisions, the Canadian government has taken significant and meaningful steps here in Canada to restore the place of victims in the justice system and to make sure their voices are heard. The Federal Victim Strategy works to respond to the needs of victims of crime. In Sri Lanka, most of the victims of war are women and children. Too often, these victims are frightened into silence, and there's no one to give them a voice. By funding local, credible groups that provide support and counseling to victims of war, the victims would be able to somewhat continue their lives. So the question here is, can Canada take similar initiatives in Sri Lanka to promote our Canadian values there?
Absolutely. This is a field where we have been involved, but where we should probably consider more involvement. I'm aware of many private initiatives by Tamil Canadians whose roots are in Sri Lanka to empower people at home to speak up, to defend themselves, to tell their stories. And this is one of the great advantages Sri Lanka has. There is a vibrant civil society there. There is diversity in the press. I wouldn't say that these days there's total media freedom, and it's risky to say certain things for journalists.
There are many in exile.
And there are many in exile. But at least there is a multiplicity of views in the media, and we need to strengthen that and try to return media freedom to its proper place in Sri Lankan society. But I was impressed, I think our delegation was impressed when we went to Jaffna by the human rights defenders with whom we met. These are very courageous people. Their work is not without risk. They are writing down the stories of victims. They are making reports, sometimes anonymously, but to some of the organizations, international and otherwise, that you mentioned. And they also know the risks. They have friends who have been intimidated or even paid higher prices, who haven't been heard from again. And so Canada has been involved in empowering their voices, and through them the voices of victims, usually in micro ways, because we have to be discreet, we have to be careful, so that we don't put people at risk. But that is a cause, as you rightly say, that we will champion wherever we think it is not being respected. In Canada, where we absolutely think that victims have a bigger role to play in the justice system than we've seen in recent years, and in other parts of the world like Sri Lanka, where there's been conflict on a significant scale, and victims are more numerous as a result.
Looking at Canada's strategies and plans, Canada is already facing labor shortages in some critical areas, that being Alberta, the welding and that industry over there. The government has introduced the Economic Action Plan 2012 program to help more young people gain tangible skills and experience and to connect young Canadians with jobs in fields that are in high demand. The question is, can you please tell us briefly who's eligible, how it works, and how youth can find careers and jobs that will be in high demand in the near future?
Yeah. Well, there are many dimensions to our skills strategy in the Economic Action Plan, but my best advice to young people would be to go online and read it, because for new Canadians, those who are just arrived in the country as immigrants or as permanent residents, there's one set of opportunities. For those who are just graduating from high school, there's another set of opportunities: apprenticeship programs, skills training that involves community colleges, and in some cases, federally supported opportunities in universities to be part of research and development. You as an engineer will know more about that almost than I will. But you're absolutely right. Young people who sometimes wonder what's there for them need to be focused. There are jobs in this country. They aren't always just around the corner, though I think in Ajax we're doing all right here. And they aren't necessarily as far away as Alberta. Obviously, there's a lot of activity happening there, and in British Columbia. Kitchener-Waterloo, many job openings for people with specific skills, not just software developers, a wide range of skills.
I've heard of workers from the U.S. coming into Canada on temporary visits. Yeah.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, that will continue until we start to show the young people across Canada where the jobs are, how they can get hold of them. And here, a lot of the solutions and the information are online. Almost every job that is open in Canada posts a job offering online. They're not all in the same place. You have to look carefully. There are a lot of different search engines for job opportunities, like Workopolis, like Monster, Search Engine People, a company right above us here, plays a big role in this. That world is changing, but if you go online and search thoroughly, you'll find things. And, some are in Eastern Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador. Huge construction opportunities, especially in Labrador, but also in Newfoundland itself. Northern Quebec and Ontario, small towns, far away, but job shortages because they're building a mine or because they're building a smelter or because they're building a road or a bridge. And this can be an exciting opportunity for a young person, not necessarily for your whole life, but for a few years.
When do you think that the new regulations covering foreign investment into Canada would be made available? I ask this because of the recent Nixon bid by China into Canada. This could possibly have future influence over the Canadian economy and the job market if there is an increased presence of foreign investment. And we know, famously, that China's values are very different from Canadian values. So,
absolutely, China is a particular case, and it needs to be looked at very seriously, as the government has promised we will. But the main principle here is that Canada is open for business. We need investment. We will not have the jobs, the standard of living, the levels of productivity that we want to have if we don't attract our share and more of global capital flows. And that goes for our research, for our resource sector, as well as for research and development, manufacturing, services, and so forth. So, on the whole, this government will continue to show that we are a good place to invest and to welcome foreign investors, as we have done from the beginning. But in the case of China, you're right, there are issues here. There are issues of reciprocity. There are apparently some sectors in China that aren't open for foreign investment. We're asking questions about that. But the good news is that Prime Minister Harper, with his Chinese counterpart, signed a foreign investment protection agreement at the recent APEC summit in Vladivostok, which I think is one of the first that China has signed with any advanced economy. That should help Canadian investors who want to invest in China, and there is quite a big footprint for Canada there already. As for the Nixon bid, you've heard the Prime Minister. We as politicians can't really comment on it because there is an independent review process. But our government is committed to making the rules very clear for foreign investment. They haven't been as clear as we would like, and we will be coming forward with that framework for foreign investment relatively soon. I don't think I can give you a specific date, though.
Okay, all right, thank you. We went over labor and foreign investment, and now let's look a bit into Canada's trade. As you mentioned, at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, the APEC summit, when Prime Minister Harper stated that China should play by the same rules that apply in Canada, did he mean that China should value human rights and oppose regimes like in Syria and Sri Lanka in order to have a better trade relationship with Canada? I ask this because Russia, along with China, has blocked resolutions at the United Nations Security Council that condemn President Bashar Assad. Likewise, China and Russia are strong allies of Sri Lanka, and the two countries have protected Sri Lanka in the UNHRC sessions from war crimes investigations.
Yeah, I mean, we take our values with us wherever we go in the world, and we're proud of that. The APEC summit is no exception, and you heard Prime Minister Harper pressing both the president of Russia and his Chinese counterpart on the issue of Syria. What's the difference between Libya and Syria? And even between Iran and Syria? We've had quite forceful action to bring about regime change and to ensure a change of regime and to ensure the protection of civilians in Libya because there was a UN Security Council resolution. We've had coordinated international sanctions against Iran to give them a powerful incentive not to develop nuclear weapons because of action taken at the Security Council, which Russia and China backed. We would like to see that action go further, but we're grateful for the support we've had from them on that issue. On Syria, we haven't found that agreement. And as you implied, Russia and China have vetoes. The United Nations becomes powerless to stop the violence in Syria when it is divided the way we have been. So Prime Minister Harper has spoken out about this. We will continue to speak out, particularly about Russia's role in defending Bashar al-Assad, even as he exacts greater and greater tolls of misery and brutality from his population. Killing 25,000 of your own people in 2011, 2012 is a very, very grave matter. And we cannot let it drop. We will not let it drop. But why do we raise these issues with China, with Russia, with everyone where we have concern? Because we know from our own experience in Canada, from the experience of other advanced economies, that respect for human rights, for human dignity, freedom of speech, all of these hard-won benefits to citizenship that we have in this country are prerequisites for having the standard of living that we have. We only have it because we have the free circulation of ideas, because we have the security of person, because we have the rights and freedoms that we have, that our legal system protects. And where countries circumscribe those rights, they're not doing as well. We've seen great growth in China. We've seen real improvements since I first went there in Russia and in the standard of living of Russians. But without progress on human rights, to secure those freedoms, to allow people to have security of property, to feel like they are full citizens of the country and able to speak out, express themselves, participate in the political process, there are real limits to development. And I don't think this is as well understood as it should be, but that's what motivates us. It's not because we are against this or that country. We're not. We're for the trade with these countries. We're for the economic development of these countries. But economic development and political freedom, in our experience, and I think in the best global experience that's available, have to go hand in hand.
And you mentioned that the regime in Syria has been killing their own people. And I think that's something that the Tamil Canadians here can really resonate with, because in 2009, there were reports by UN's Gordon Weiss that said that possibly 40,000 or more Tamils were massacred during that time. So that's something that Tamil Canadians can really understand.
That's right. And when you look at the whole length of the conflict in Sri Lanka, the number of victims, principally Tamil victims, could run well over 100,000. No one has a definitive number. There are all kinds of guesses, and some people have done partial research. But one of the tragedies is that the full scale of this conflict is not yet known. Look at the effort that was made in Cambodia to come to terms with the numbers of victims there, millions of people, and even to address some of the concerns of transitional justice. Even in Afghanistan, where conflict continues, a lot of work was done to identify who died at what stage, in what circumstances. I was proud to be part of that work, and Canada supported some of it. In Sri Lanka, because the government is really just turning away from this issue, things haven't gone in the right direction on this issue.
So let's take our focus back to at the riding level, Ajax Pickering. What are some of the issues that are of top concern for the people here, and how are they being tackled? Yes.
Great question, and I'm very confident answering that because I had a roundtable about economic issues, which tend to be the most prominent in people's concerns, right at the beginning of this week on Monday evening. And I think the main concern people have is about infrastructure, and it's about transportation. When you compare the east of the GTA with the north and the west, so Durham region with York region and Peel, one of the concerns is there just aren't as many high-speed lanes of traffic connecting us. I think there are only 12 lanes that come into Durham, whereas there are well over 40 going north into York and over 70 going west. So the potential for bottlenecks is huge. 407 is being extended, but we're concerned that that isn't happening fast enough. The federal money has been on the table for a long time. The provincial government, I'm afraid, has dragged its feet. The first extension of the 407 out to Harmony Road in Oshawa is due to start this year and finish in 2015, but then we don't know when the next stage will come. So that's a concern. The other major concern that everyone raises with me is related. They love their quality of life in Ajax, in Durham as a whole, but they would like to work closer to home. If you have to commute to Mississauga or Brampton, it's a long way.
Oh, yeah.
And so, as for everyone in the GTA and for us in Canada, people want to see us as leaders in the community working to attract employers here. And it is a great place to, I think, set up your research and development, your manufacturing, your service industry. The infrastructure is here for that, and certainly the workforce is here.
One can reasonably say that for the effective functioning of the Canadian government and the decisions that it makes, it's necessary that Canadian citizens play a role as well. So the final question is, how important do you think it is for Canadians to get involved and communicate their concern, whatever the subject may be, to their MPs and other elected officials?
It's absolutely vital. I mean, this is non-negotiable for Canadians. We have the right to vote in elections whenever they come along, but having a healthy democracy has to involve much more than that. It has to involve taking your duties as a citizen seriously, following what the issues are, following how much money your government is spending, municipal, provincial, federal, speaking out if you think the government's out of line, spending too much on something or not enough on something else, and keeping that dialogue going. Everyone has 1, 2, 3 issues that are really important for them. You should involve your MP or your MPP or your municipal councillor in those dialogues. We really appreciate it. I mean, this is what our life is. It's a continuous series of conversations, online, in town hall meetings. I have coffee with Chris meetings in this room, at the door with people, at community events, on the telephone, through correspondence, about dozens of issues. And one that I'm very proud to have been involved with for the last couple of years involves Sri Lanka. Obviously, Iran is a big issue this week. Afghanistan, I've stayed involved and will stay involved. So a lot of them have an international dimension, but the most important ones are local, and they are economic. We have to build the economy of the future, and that involves everyone. That involves decisions about how to invest in innovation, about how to invest in infrastructure, and most of all, about how to invest in our young people to make sure they have the skills and the resilience to take on the challenges of an increasingly competitive world.
Right. So that brings us to the conclusion of our interview. And I understand that it was your birthday this past Sunday, so I would like to wish you happy belated birthday wishes.
Thank you so much.
And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure.